Hello, citizens. This is Remarkable Republican, and I'm here once again to bring you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. I've been doing a lot of research into the murder mystery of Chris Benoit, and I think I have found the solution. Join me as we explore this case from 2007 and uncover the truth about what really happened to Chris Benoit on that fateful day. If you have learned anything, both from what has happened in the world and from watching this channel, you know that you can never trust the mainstream. They will not tell you the truth. The fact is, Chris Benoit could not and did not do a murder-suicide on his family. Here are some facts that you need to consider. 1. Chris Benoit was a Christian. It would be against his faith to murder his family. A Christian would not do that. Fact number 2. Nancy's death appeared on Wikipedia a day or so before the police discovered the bodies. This makes no sense unless the person who killed her posted about her death. Chris was not a computer guy, so he would not have thought to do something like that. Further, the only other possibility aside from a murderer doing it is that the police discovered this and for some reason decided to announce it on Wikipedia before they reported it. That would be pretty stupid. It would make them look bad. One other thing to consider that most people ignore. Eddie Guerrero, Benoit's best friend, also died under very odd circumstances 2 years earlier. He was only 38 or 39 and he died of a massive heart attack despite the fact that he was in great health and very athletic and all that. That simply doesn't happen, and it means he must have been poisoned in some way. Something was askew. And perhaps there is some relation between these two cases, but I won't get into that now. If you want to learn more about the death of Eddie Guerrero, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll revisit that case. Another thing that we have to keep in mind is that the official story is that Chris Benoit used the crippler crossface, his only submission move, in order to kill his wife and son. This was the only submission move that he knew. There are a couple problems with that. One, Nancy was herself a former pro wrestler. She was good in the ring, and if anything, in terms of pure skill, might have been better than Chris. She also knew his moves and knew counters, so if he was going to choke her out, he'd have to do something that would just involve a lot of strength. He wouldn't be able to put a special move on her. That's just not realistic. The crippler crossface, by the way, for those of you who know anything about wrestling, is not a real wrestling move. It doesn't actually do anything. It inflicts no pain. It puts no pressure on you. It is purely for show. Unlike most submission moves that are in wrestling, this one is kind of a joke, and it's amazing that people took it seriously and then realized that it was fake. But there's absolutely no way that you could hurt someone or make them pass out or murder them with a crippler crossface. It's physically impossible. Barring Kevin having some satanic powers that we don't know about, which made him stronger, Kevin Sullivan was older, smaller, and weaker than Chris Benoit. It is very hard for me to imagine Kevin being able to overpower Chris and then use his submission skills. If he had entered the house and tried to challenge Chris head on, Chris would have won the fight because he's younger, faster, and stronger. Despite suspicions by many people, especially on the internet, there actually has been no evidence found linking Sullivan to the crime. His alibi checks out. There was no paper trail of money or anything like that. There are no fingerprints. The police in Georgia at that time were still solidly Republican, unlike now after years of voter fraud, corruption, and whatever else, communism. And at that time, they were the types of guys who would not have covered for a Satanist. So there would be no reason to think at this point that Kevin Sullivan did anything unless he was magically able to overpower a much stronger man without leaving behind DNA at some point. So he could not have really been involved. It just doesn't add up. To be a good suspect, you have to have both a motive and the means to get the job done. I found someone who is more than physically capable of taking out Chris Benoit and who also had a much better motive than Kevin Sullivan. That man is John Morrison, who wrestled at the time under the name Johnny Nitro. It was only a few years later we started using his legal name, John Morrison. When Benoit ended up missing a pay-per-view event where he was supposed to compete for the ECW Championship, John Morrison stepped in and filled his slot and then got to be ECW Champion. This was his first world title reign. So he gained big time from this, and the motive is quite obvious. He was someone who was just on the cusp of competing for that, and by taking out someone in the form of Benoit who was at that level, the main event, he was able to create a slot for himself. As a guy who was very young and athletic, he could match Benoit 1-for-1. Benoit might have been a bit stronger, but Morrison was quicker and could use a lot of sort of karate-style kicks. He was very agile and athletic. So it would have been a tough matchup, and Nitro could have easily won. Johnny Nitro also led a wrestling gang, M&M. This was a group with himself, his good friend Joey Mercury, and his girlfriend Melina. And they were not only a wrestling gang in wrestling, but they also had been a gang before that. Joey Mercury was basically a lot like Johnny Nitro in terms of what he could do, but he just wasn't as good. But if you have Johnny Nitro who's as good as Benoit, and then another guy who's almost as good, and they're in a fight, well, guess what? 2-on-1, it's kind of not going to be a very fair fight, is it? As for Melina, Nitro's girlfriend, she was a hot Mexican, and therefore she could pose in a lot of different capacities that most people couldn't. She could come to the door saying that she's a maid from a maid service, or she could say that she is a door-to-door evangelist for a Mexican church or something like that, or she's raising money for a new taco restaurant, whatever it might be, and then gain entry into the house. Another thing to keep in mind is that Johnny Nitro was a very bad ECW champion. The reason why that's important to remember is that he might have been bad because he wasn't really feeling it. Maybe he was feeling some remorse for the crimes he had committed. Because every other time he's been champion, he's been fairly good. I think the evidence here is pretty strong, and that there's about a 90% chance that John Morrison and his associates were responsible for the deaths of the Benoit family. So how did Morrison and company pull this off? Well, I think that they must have started with a honeypot in order to get into the house. A honeypot is where you use your sex appeal to get people to open the door or to expose themselves in some way. So either Johnny came over and started talking up Nancy, and then she let him in, the others rushed in. Maybe even Joey Mercury got involved, most likely it was Johnny Nitro though. Or Melina worked her wiles on Chris, assuming he was home. Either way, once they got in, they rushed in as a group and seized control. If I had to bet, I would say that they waited until Chris went out to run an errand or something like that, and then they pulled this off on Nancy, set up an ambush, and took Chris when he came home. That would be the smart way to do it. The killings were then elaborately staged and spaced out to create the impression that Benoit had a breakdown. It would make sense because M&M also was known for doing a lot of elaborate stuff in terms of their ring ritual. They had a really involved entry where they would have people with air machines and a carpet, and they would do a pose, and then John would jump up on the ramp, or actually no, Melina would jump up and then do this split thing and go under John's legs. I mean, they had like this whole ritual they would do. So they were really into rituals, and it would be possible for them to make something like this look really professional and make it look like Benoit had a breakdown. And they would have been able to do that by managing the house and keeping order. So this, I think, is what almost certainly happened in 2007, and it's really a shame that John Morrison has gone on to win so many accolades given that he is a murderer. Until next time, I'm Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with truth-flavored bias, signing out.